All right, communicating that value. So, continuing this thread of, we'll talk about internal a bit more and then we'll get into the external. For your boss, having like a weekly email update with a quick value anecdote, perhaps about a patron served, item found, celebrating project milestones or lessons learned, those are all great equation sentences to share with your boss. And the weekly email update is a great way to do that, even if it's more of an ad hoc nature versus a like having to send an email every Monday, for example. When thinking about your boss's boss or board, sending that email to let them know about a big win or a grant won or a project completed. So it's still focused on celebrating those successes, but it is also subtly, maybe not so subtly, depending on how observant the person is, I suppose, that you have done X action and it has had Y value provided and a very real number based result, especially if it's grant related. Sharing those equation type sentences in this way with your boss's boss or board is a great way to keep them up to speed on what it is that you do, but to also make sure that the collections value and your value as a collections worker is always front of mind for them and is never a question or a blank space. And when thinking about both of them, if you're an organization that does annual reports, using those reports and having clear ties to how your day-to-day work supports income streams and helps the broader organization actually meet its mission. So many of us, when we do our annual reports, we're focused on the values at the very beginning of this presentation. We're focused on collections care, management, and access. Those are great values, and there's some great statistics that we gather to show that work in terms of like how many objects were on exhibit, how many linear feet were processed, how many items were cataloged or went out on loan. Those are great. But if we are communicating with anyone outside of our department, we need to make sure we're making direct ties to how we are supporting the income streams of our organization. Because quite honestly, I think many people who are above and out of any sort of collections care department, I don't think they really care how many linear feet we processed or how many objects were on display. They're going to care about your ultimate impact on the bottom line. And right now, they are only aware of how much you are costing them. So you need to flip the narrative and actually show them how you're supporting bringing revenue in. Continuing the internal, thinking about your peers. So this can look like a variety of things, usually email or now for people, Teams, Slack, whatever sort of communication channel has now been established at your organization, providing fun, ad hoc, or somewhat timely, behind the scenes, fun anecdotes, aha moments, cool stats. Like, quite honestly, if it makes you excited as a collections worker, this is the area and audience that I would encourage you to share those geeking out moments with. So whether it is with your internal peers or sharing it with the field on like a Facebook group, I encourage you to do that. That helps make you helps the practice of framing what it is that you do and communicating that value, but it also helps to reward the like you did a really cool thing, and while your boss may not get how cool it is, your people will. So find your people. Also, always have a collection story that highlights the value of your work in your back pocket to use when you're in the elevator, before meetings, when you're in the dining hall, whatever sort of situation you find yourself in, where you have like 30 seconds to a minute to share just like one equation sentence with someone, perhaps the director of the museum. Taking that opportunity and always having that ready will help you be able to more freely and confidently share those value messages, and certainly would increase frequency of those value messages getting to everyone in your internal ecosystem. Okay, shifting to external now. So your community, whether that looks like a newsletter, blog, social media, being transparent and sharing victories like grants won or challenges such as conservation issues, all of those are interesting. And it, again, sort of subtly enhances or emphasizes the value of your work. So we all agree in this venue that the collections have value. This particular anecdote is the value of your work. And then for granting agencies and donors and your government, if they're part of your income stream, annual reports, even if they were created mostly for just internal uses, can be both informative and appreciated by people in like the city government, for example, or the granting agency. Also, any sort of email update, press releases, sharing stats, anecdotes, just to demonstrate how much of the community you're serving and how. It doesn't have to be like a big long report. Quite honestly, people love getting good news. So as long as you're not emailing them every day with good news, which I guess that would be a happy problem. But my point being, nobody's going to be super mad about getting emails about how awesome you're doing, especially if it's in service of a shared community. So your city council, for example, is going to love how much you're helping or being available to or engaging with your shared community. So I want you to now consider the person. So we've talked about categories of your community and different strategies or mechanisms, packaging for those different categories of people. And now I want you to think about who that actual person is, that specific person, and ask yourself, what is their motivation and what are they basing their decisions on? Because depending on what the answers are to both of those questions, will determine what sort of information they actually find of interest and of value, and if it helps to support or positively impact their motivations or sort of their end goal. They're going to be more tuned in to what it is that you're saying and more self-interested in wanting to help or support your message. So taking a moment and being smart, getting into some of the psychology of who it is that you're dealing with can help you pitch that message, both in terms of packaging, but also in terms of emphasis. So package accordingly. Typically, for most people, their answer to what motivates them is going to be one or more of these things. The top one is usually money. For any sort of outside nonprofit field, this would typically be money brought in, profit. However, in our mostly nonprofit field, I would argue it is more so typically the fear of too much money spent or not enough money. So while they could certainly be focused on, yes, we need to bring revenue in and we want profit, they are also just as likely to be fearful and thinking about how much money is this going to cost me. The next thing that they may be thinking about or motivated by is how does your particular value proposition help support the mission? So the collection, and especially you as the collection worker, what is it that you're doing that is actually relevant to the mission? Now, again, as collection workers, like it's so obvious that what we do directly supports the mission, but it does need to be spelled out to anybody who is not a collection worker. Another thing that motivates is strategy. And for the most part, when I say strategy here, I'm thinking like strategic plan, for example. If there's any sort of somewhat shortish term, like anywhere from 1 to 5 years sort of planning that's happening, how does your work helps support that sort of short-term vision. And especially if it's your boss or the board of directors that are immersed in the strategic plan thinking, this is going to be something you should tap into so that you're basically speaking the same language. How are you supporting the strategic plan? The next item that may be of a motivating factor for them, the person you're talking to, whether they know it or not, is ego. And if I had to guess, for a lot of us, especially with the higher ups, ego is definitely going to be in play here. And sometimes that's a great thing we can tap into in terms of encouraging and supporting a healthy ego, and how your work can help support the broader view of the team, view of that person's ability as your boss. But it can also be an unhealthy ego. Either way, as long as you're aware that ego is at play here, you can still use it to your advantage. So while we have certainly talked about and can talk more about unhealthy egos later, my point is that you can still use that to inform your messaging. And then the last thing that tends to motivate people is because it's the right thing to do. And again, as collection workers, for us, we're all such kind-hearted people. I think that this is our natural go-to in terms of like our job is to take care of the collections. We love them. Like it's not a question. And so the choices we make because it's the right thing to do, whether according to best practice or ethics or what have you. This is probably the last motivator for anybody else who is not us, at least in this context. So it's good to know if it's in play for somebody you're talking to. Perhaps granting agencies may be a bit more in alignment with the right thing to do. So use it if it's there, but I also just want to highlight, because so many of you are innocents, that the right thing to do strategy is not always present, or certainly not as present as I would like it to be as a motivator. All right, so once you've thought about that in terms of the specific person you are going to approach with your communication, I want you to start thinking about the message. So what is the need to know? Again, thinking about the one sentence equation, how short can we keep this message? Because the shorter and clearer it is, the more likely it's to be remembered and the more likely it is to have impact. So what is the absolute need to know? And then what's the bottom line, or what's your ask? So you've stated like this is what you need to know. And I am telling you this because I need this, or this needs to happen, or this will happen if nothing is done. So giving them the, okay, I've told you this, and now this is why I told you this. And then take purposeful pauses and get comfortable in the discomfort. Quite honestly, this is going to be, I think, the hardest part for many of us, myself included. And I encourage you to think of it as a practice, like yoga is a practice. I want you to practice taking a beat and letting your boss or whoever's on the other side sit in the discomfort of the quiet. Because if you've told them what they need to know, and if you have then told them why you told them that, what it is that you need, it is now their turn in the social contract to respond to that. And you need to give them the opportunity, the pause to respond to you. Because what we tend to do as collection workers and as people who are typically a bit more anxious about communicating needs and communicating with people who are perhaps higher up, we tend to just continue talking. And while we may have done a great job stating the like need to know and the what I need part, we will just keep on talking and talk ourselves and our boss or whomever out of whatever it is that we asked for. So I want you to try and short circuit that and give that pause, sit in that quiet, because according to the social contract, it is now that other person's turn to react to what you said. And so we need to give them an opportunity to take on that message and then respond, hopefully in a very positive and affirming way. So, to leave you with just some good communication tips: be clear, be concise, be consistent, and be on mission. So, when you are communicating with people, and especially if it's like a verbal with another human in real time, having those clear, concise comments or tidbits, conversations, and making sure that you're staying on topic, on mission will help keep your overall message clear.